So I wanted to start off with how to embed ESG in remarketing operations. It starts with the beginning, the collection, and you all know very well the whole life cycle of a car. Collection to sell with refurbishment, transport, and so on and so forth. Each of those steps have an environmental impact. Climate change with the emissions carbon, but also on pollution. Pollution, we know, have health issues impact, premature death sometimes. Pollution of water as well. And let's not forget harming biodiversity. There's also the impact of resources that we are using for this. Drawing on natural finite resources is a challenge to sustain our economic model. So how can we do? What pragmatically can we do? Well, let's start with the start, when you collect your vehicle to be sold. And I will start with one question and one comment. The best way to reduce an impact is to avoid it. So how do we avoid the impact of the transport coming from the collection? But let's not have transport by selling directly to drivers. The car stays where it is. It has an interest economically, but it also has a positive impact that it avoids a number of operations from remarketing and the impact that comes with it. Next comes the transport, because not all sales could be done directly to drivers, so you have to transport. Low carbon transport for cars, trucks, and electric trucks are unfortunately not there yet. You have a number of pilots. It's interesting, it's to watch, but we cannot yet incorporate that in our operating model just yet. With the electrification of vehicles that we sell comes the question of relevance of transport. So is it relevant to transport low emissions vehicle with a very high emissive vehicles? And we can do something about it. A strategy that is quite simple is jockeys. So you send someone in some areas where it's permitted with public transportation to get the car and take the benefit of its low emissions. That reduces the impact that you have on your transport. So hopefully you get your car, it's in the storage location, it's with reduced carbon impact, it's good for the climate. But unfortunately, I'm afraid to say that the climate will not repay in kind, at least not immediately. The moment your car entered your storage location, it's exposed to risks, physical risk, and increased physical risk due to climate events. Last year, 12 billions of euros of assets were destroyed by climate events in Europe. 12 billions destroyed. So that's something that you should consider on how you're tackling it for the assets that are very valuable, cars, on storage. What strategy can you do to mitigate that? Well, first, protection. How can you mitigate the impact of such climatic events arising? Second, thinking about the location of your hubs, taking into consideration the exposure to those risks in the location you choose to have your storage. Overall, that will help you have a strategy on building the mesh on the network of your locations, storage locations, that will allow you to optimize the routes to collect the vehicles and transport them, but also minimize the impact and the risk that you get from climate. Then you might consider refurbishing to have a car that is in good order to be sold at the best price possible. That's what your job is about. Refurbishing draws on resources, has an impact on pollution as well. But there are a number of techniques that are not very new, but are taking more importance to minimize those impacts. And I will start with my favorite question. Is it worth repairing? As I said, the best way to reduce an impact is to avoid it. So, is it worth repairing? Is the client willing to pay a little bit less and avoid us all the hassle of having to do this repair? You know, to be honest, if you have a scratch on a bumper in Paris or any other urban areas that is dense like that, it's not so much of an issue. Then you have also to think about other strategies that have been known here. Repair versus replace. And they do have an impact very concretely. Repair versus replace, with the example of windshield, it's 80% CO2 less. 80% compared to a brand new windshield. That's quite significant. Use of circular parts, or reuse vehicles from old vehicles, total loss, into refurbishing the new ones is going to, in some instances, allow you to divide your cost by 2, as well as divide your impact by 2. So that's a quite interesting equation to have. And then you have smart repair. So you still need to repair, but you have a number of techniques that exist to minimize the area that you need to repair, to minimize the use of energy, to minimize the paint job that's needed. Today at Arval, we have 1 event out of 5 that is done that way, and we are striving to increase that number going forward. So these strategies have been long around, nothing really new under the sun, but they are becoming more and more critical to face the challenge we have to build a sustainable future. The next phase is actually the heart of a remarketing business. It's about sell. And maybe you guess where I'm headed, and you probably are telling, okay, no, he's not going to dare saying that and dare suggesting that. So the first question is it worth selling? The best way to avoid an impact, the best way to reduce an impact is to avoid it. Avoiding the sale can have an impact as well. So you can have a positive strategy to mitigate that by extending the usefulness of the asset in the fleet. Extending by having it longer, or extending it by giving it a second life, releasing it, offering it to some other use cases. And we'll see that, especially in the case of BEVs, it has a positive impact. So as you can see, the number of strategies to reduce the impact from your operation are quite numerous, quite pragmatical, nothing really groundbreaking from what I'm saying, but you need to start. I have often a say that is, you need to make progress, not to strive for perfection. And get you in action actually would bring more, will help you raise the bar. So you have an operating model that is reducing its environmental impact. That's good, but that's good for the planet, but that's good as well for the people. Very often, we have very, very high stakes on environment, and we tend to focus on that and forget that ultimately, why are we mitigating the environmental impact? The Earth is going to live with or without us, with or without those impacts. It's for the people that live in Earth that we are striving to limit the impact on climate. People are key. We need to propose them, as well as mitigation actions on environment, mitigation action that offers those people the ability to have a decent life, a decent way of living, to have access to energy, to have access to drinkable water, to education, to equality of chance. That's very important. And why is it important in the context of a corporate world? Well, it's important because we spend quite some time at work. Let's be clear about that. And you have to contribute to that by offering decent working conditions at the very minimum, but strive to aim for well-being at work, work-life balance, because there's no better way of engaging people is to offer this environment that fosters their performance. And it will also help engage them in the transformation that we are actually living. Let's not underestimate the magnitude of change that we are faced with the electrification. And it starts with our own workforce. We are shifting our model in terms of skills and competence from a mechanical competence, where we had expertise, people that could tell you the maintenance schedule very precisely, the performance of each and every pieces. But what happens tomorrow when we have majority of the fleet, which is BEV, and mechanical is not so much the topic. It's about technology. To be able to assess the value of the vehicle you're trying to sell, to be able to operate efficiently the vehicle you're trying to sell. In order to foster this environment that is conducting to performance, you also have to embark diversity and inclusion. You have a number of ways of doing so. A number of companies have had a very voluntary approach for quite some time that has been framed recently with the CSRD, the reporting directive that has framed policies, actions, and KPIs to follow on all kinds of aspects of diversity that help some of the people and companies to mature and define the proper strategy. Even if you're not subject to CSRD, you're impacted. We had a survey that demonstrates that around 70% of the SMEs are impacted by CSRD, and I think it's about 30% of them that mentioned that they were not directly targeted by the directive, meaning that it's a knock-on effect from the value chain. Their clients are asking from them. And we, as a company, have a duty to establish a responsible sourcing and a responsible supply chain. So asking to our suppliers a number of elements beyond the compliance, that's the level 0. I mean, you need to be compliant. And you would have strategies to scan your suppliers on a risk-based approach, making sure that you're not exposed to increased risk by dealing with these particular suppliers. You can move further and having an ESG-based supplier selection, where you would be rewarding the most performant suppliers on ESG. That's sending a signal to the market and the ecosystem. You can have diverse spend as well. So specifically targeting companies that support specific minority, dedicating some of the budget and having objective to foster that. Here the challenge is that there is no yet global framework at European level, so to drive a strategy it's a bit complex because you have very different strategies across the member states of Europe, and it's a bit difficult. For instance, in France, we are very much working with a state-regulated status of companies that are to foster access to work for people with disabilities, people that have been long unemployed. So we still have some room there, and it will also potentially come with the upcoming corporate due diligence regulation that's on its way. So it's been significantly reduced in ambition very recently. But as I said, I have the conviction that even if it's not mandatory, companies will not stop caring about their suppliers, caring about the health and safety of the workers in the value chain, stop caring about diversity in their supply chain. They will have more leeway, and in a way it could be beneficial for them to have less administrative burden from the regulation. And let's not forget people, our clients are people. And we owe to them transparency and fairness in the way we are proposing them our service. I was mentioning the refurbishment earlier. And we have to build trust with them, and it's particularly key on the BEV market, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And finally, for the client, something that's taking an increasing importance is data and data protection. More and more the vehicles we have coming in the remarketing area are smartphones with wheels, with very significant personal data footprint. So we have to manage that responsibly. This would be a missed opportunity to consider this only as an obligation. It is an opportunity. I want to reinforce and reinstate that. It is an opportunity to engage our workforce, our supplier, our whole ecosystem. And they will in turn set expectations, regulatory, clients, partners, all of them will set expectations, and that we will have to meet. This is how remarketing is going to embark ESG in its operating model. But as we said, electrification is key, and we have the belief that electrification is good on the long run. On the full life cycle, an electric vehicle is 70% less CO2 emission. So there's no doubt we need to go down that route. At what pace? How is the difficulty and the challenge we have to solve collectively? But I'm convinced that remarketing has a pivotal role to play in that. Without a proper used car market to support the EV transition with assurance that the value of your car is retained over time, that would delay the decision of buying in the first place. That will impact leasing companies such as Arval to include the additional risk on residual value into the rent and delaying further some of the electrification. So a few ideas on how can we tackle that challenge collectively. Making mobility cheaper, and I mentioned used car market, used car BEVs can be an answer and a strategy. Why? Because mechanically they come with a cheaper price. So they are factually cheaper, allowing to target people that wouldn't be in a position to buy a brand new car. Yet, we are not in a position to substantiate that yet, because we do not necessarily monitor if we are selling to a lower income client. It could be an accelerator for the fleet transition, for fleet managers to have access to electric cars which are more affordable and still meet the need of the client, whilst still being reliable. And that's my next point. BEVs are reliable. It's not me, it's not a conviction, it's the hard facts. We have been for quite some time conducting systematic testing of the vehicle, the BEVs we are selling on a number of cars. So we started with 6,000, we are now around 20,000 of them. And the figures don't lie. After those tests, what came out of the study is that we have 80%, 98% of the vehicles and batteries that retain more than 80% of their capacity, whatever their mileage, even the long mileage. So the battery is going to last longer. And that's good because it builds trust on the used car market. That's good because we have a better use of the critical minerals and materials we use in the battery. It poses a challenges to recycling because it can delay the time at which the battery would be available for recycling. And that can be delaying quite significantly, but considering the uptake of BEVs, anyway, recycling is not going to be mainstream way of collecting the critical material before quite some time. So I want to conclude, and I have to conclude. Embedding ESG in sustainable remarketing is not about constraint, it's about opportunity. It's not about regulatory, it's about performance. So you need to consider it as integrating that in the operating system of your company, and that will drive performance. Managing your supply chain through a responsible supply chain is managing costs, is managing risks you're exposed to. So you need to treat this really as a performance system and not just something on the side. And that's what we are striving to do, and that's what I would like you to conclude with, and conclude with the idea that no, remarketing is not only about reselling BEVs, it's about much more, and it can have much broader impact on many aspects of ESG. Thank you.